what to do for the Seforim sale. And when thinking about what we should do to get more people to come, to try and increase kind of like a community sense, we wanted to think of different panels we could put together to kind of like inform random people in the communities. Try gain interest, the thing that they have interest in, to try and give them more knowledge on these things. So last week we had a dating done right panel. This week we have this Chassidus panel. Next week we have a medical ethics panel. To introduce the people we have here, everybody here I'm connected with except for one, and I told them that as Mechila before, as Mechila now. First, our moderator, Rav Shevkin. I had the privilege of working with him this summer in NCSY's summer office. He helped a lot with this Seforim sale in terms of what to order, in terms of putting this panel together and different speakers together. So I have a lot of credit to you. Shkoyach, thank you very much. Rav Schiller, I was in his 9th grade Chumash class. He loves teaching freshmen, so it was a great experience. The truth is, I learned a lot. I learned a lot in that class, and I now say I actually learned by Yikra. Not since then, but then I did learn by Yikra. Rebbe Hofer is also a very close Rebbe to me. He's at my 11th grade Rebbe, someone I now am still very close with, still keep in touch with, and has had a lot of hashpah in my life. So I thank you for that, and thank you for being here. And without further ado, I guess let's get this show on the road.
Let's get the show on the road. Yeah. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you. Well, that's not what I didn't know. I said it's in the beginning. That's why I said no, that's why I said in the beginning. I'm not really sure who he is.
water. Okay. So we're going to dive right in.
If you guys want to use the mics.
To introduce our first question, we're going to talk about how everybody got introduced to Hasidic thought. So I'm actually a unique breed in that I think I am one of the few people, maybe in the history of the entire Yeshiva University, who left Yeshiva. I was learning in Ner Yisrael, and I left Ner Yisrael to come to YU to study Chassidus. I don't think that there's another case like that to my knowledge, maybe in more recent years. I was in Ner Yisrael and I came to study and do a master's in Revel with Dr. Yaakov Elman, and my master's thesis was comparing the thought of Rabbi Nachman and Reb Tzadok. And I had first got introduced to Reb Tzadok through a figure in my neighborhood, Ari Bergman, who first introduced the thought of Reb Tzadok to me, and I eventually went on to continue his thought in Shalavim and in Ner Yisrael. And I went to go to YU really to study Chassidus. People always ask me why somebody would get a master's in Hasidic thought, and I always tell them it's for the money. A lot of money in that industry. So I'm killing it right now. If you want any advice, just come to me afterwards. My phone rings off the hook with investment firms, nonstop. We need a master's in Hasidic. But to kick it off, I wanted to ask each panelist, how did you first get introduced to Hasidic thought? And we'll start all the way on my right with Rabbi Schiller.
Well, the point in fact is that my first introductions to Hasidic thought came when I was still outside the framework of Orthodoxy, and I was beginning to explore Torah Judaism. So I think my first introduction to Hasidic thought was either by reading Martin Buber's Tales of the Hasidim, or by reading this volume here called The Romance of Hasidism, which is written in the 1930s by a conservative Rabbi Jacob Minkin. So those were my first introductions to Hasidic thought, if it can be called such.
Tell me how old you were when that was.
Oh, I was 11. So that was what first perked my interest, and then the presence of Hasidim in Rockland County, where my family had moved when I was 12 years old, that whetted my appetite. And my next step was to actually visit Hasidic communities, one of which was Nusware, and that sort of became my measuring rod for Hasidic experience, and I think secondarily Hasidic thought, so that I came from Hasidic thought to Hasidic experience, and then later on began to explore various Seforim. But I would have to say again that my first impressions were formed by these two sources, and there was one more as a Reform rabbi by the name of Newman, who for Shakin books had a volume called the Hasidic Anthology. It was very thorough likut of Chassidus Seforim. So those are my first three tastes. So perhaps it was an idealized version of things.
Well, for going that far back, then when I was in 6th grade, I think it was, I read a book, 9.5 Mystics, by another Reform rabbi. I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
Do you remember the book?
He visited Lubavitch.
Right, Lubavitch, Bells, a few other places.
And he visited Rev Cook, I think, no? That's Yehuda?
Yes, he did. That's right. That's also in the book.
We'd instruct the panelists not to speak longer.
So, but my family on my father's side is who's here tonight is a very staunch Yekisher family. On my mother's side, it was a very staunch Litvisher family from Telz, and then we have I share a great aunt, a great uncle, together with Rabbi Reichman from our Telz side of the family, and in fact, then the family became a very prominent Lubavitcher family. My mother's name is main name is Shochet, and the Shochet family is a very prominent Lubavitch family, and so that always intrigued me from an early age as to what exactly happened there, go from classic Litvish to Chassidus. But besides that, in Seforim, my introduction to Chassidus was the Or Gdal Yahu, Reb Gedalia Shor's Sefer, which came out in 1981 when I was in Eretz Yisrael, was a mind-blowing experience, and things actually made sense. That Avraham is Chesed, and Yitzchak is Gvura, and Yaakov is Tiferes, and from there I expanded. Once when I was in the Mir in Brooklyn, I once learned with Maral on Megillas Esther, and then I complained to Reb Nochem Lansky in Baltimore, who was one of my introductions to Chassidus, and a very, very, very big tzaddik, that it was a bit too dry. And he said to me, learn Reb Tzadok, you'll enjoy it more. And from then, I haven't looked back. Reb Tzadok is an amazing, amazing resource. Whether that's real Chassidus is something we'll have to talk about in the course of the evening.
So my introduction to Hasidic thought is through Rav Moshe Wolfson, who's the Mashgiach of Torah V'das. When I was, 15 or so, we were once at the Kotel Ma'aravi for a Shachris, and my father was davening for the Amud, and it was a very slow davening. And at the end of the davening, there were these two Hasidic individuals who came over to give my father Yasher Koach. One was Rabbi Segula, the Menahel of Torah V'das, and the other was Rav Wolfson, the Mashgiach of Torah V'das. And Rav Wolfson said this was the only minyan I could keep up with, because Rav Wolfson loves to daven very slowly. And in that experience, my father invited Rav Wolfson to come to the Yeshivat Hesder of Shiloh and to give a shmooze to the Bachrim in the Yeshivat Hesder. Rav Wolfson came. He spoke about Tu B'Av. How Tu B'Av is really the Yom Tov of Shlomo HaMelech, and Shlomo HaMelech is the Gilgal of Yirmiyahu HaNavi, and it was a lot of things that I'd never heard before. And from that first introduction, a relationship began with Rav Wolfson, with his family, with his son-in-law, Rav Matel Zilber, the Stechina Rebbe. And so several years later, I was in Rav Wolfson's shul for a Shalashudis. It was in the dark, and there was a lot of singing. Went a good 2 hours after Shabbos ended. And after the davening of Mariv, I asked Rav Wolfson if he would teach a group of us from YU Hasidic thought. So Rav Wolfson's response was, he didn't have any time, and he said if you want to learn Hasidic thought, he would recommend the Seforim of Reb Tzadok, the Sfas Emes, and the Tanya. So I said to Rav Wolfson, I've tried to learn Sfas Emes, but I haven't been able to understand any of it, because he assumes a lot of knowledge that I don't have. So Rav Wolfson said, keep trying. And then he said, but really, if you really want to become a Chassid, he said, you don't need to learn Chassidish Seforim. You need to learn a lot of Gemara, be a masmid in your learning, do a lot of Chesed, daven with a lot of Kavana, and always have a place right over here for every single Jew. And that touched me very deeply. Eventually, he did agree to give us a shiur in Tanya And for about 3 years, there was a group of us from YU would go down to Borough Park to learn with Rav Wolfson in his apartment, Tanya, and that was my entree into Chassidus Seforim.
So Chassidus certainly seems to have gotten quite a bit more attention, particularly in the modern Orthodox community. I was wondering if you could speak for a moment about whether or not you think this is a positive or negative development. And I want to append to this question another thought, that from within this community, in what ways do you think the modern Orthodox community most misunderstands the world of Chassidus? I will start from Rabbi Schiller once again to kick it off.
So you're going out of order with the questions, I see.
Just to keep everybody on their toes.
In many ways, modern Orthodoxy, or better stated, I would say, certain segments of the religious Zionist community in Eretz Yisrael have become the community that experiences Chassidus Seforim and thought in a renewed, fresh way, perhaps in ways that the more established Hasidic communities that have been around for 200 plus years do not any longer experience that way, with quite that freshness, quite that frischkeit. So if you mean in your question those segments of religious Zionism in Eretz Yisrael that have really taken to Chassidus over the past 20, 30, 40 years, then certainly it's been a very positive development in those circles. In terms of America, I think that by and large it's been very positive, but it's been positive in those segments of the community which already have a grounding in essential Torah mitzvahs. When it's sort of sprinkled where there is not yet this basic grounding, I find that it can be either flippant or antinomian at times. That, but by that I mean to say that just jumping and hopping and bopping and ruach and things like this, which do not have a grounding in Torah and Yerushalayim and Halacha, can be meaningless at best. So I think we have to be very careful that there has to be a degree of a layer of a serious understanding of and commitment to Torah mitzvahs in order for the well springs of Chassidus to make the ground more fertile and to have spiritual growth. Occasionally, there is the other side of the coin, which sometimes you may find a person who simply cannot respond to what he might perceive mistakenly as the dry structure of halacha and Torah, and occasionally that person can be awakened by Hasidic thought. But I think by and large it takes place, as I say, serious religious Zionist circles or the more serious Torah-oriented modern Orthodox circles. And conceivably, I once said to someone that Hasidic movement is 200, 250 years old. That's a long time for a movement to stay around and be fresh. The phrase routinization of charisma comes to mind, that after a certain period in which you have a revolutionary Renaissance movement, it then becomes the establishment. So in some sense, perhaps the Chadal or the Chabakuk elements in Eretz Yisrael, they don't have that 250-year period of institutionalization, and that perhaps to some extent the movement will continue among them.
I don't like the term modern Orthodox, so I'm going to respond to this just in terms of the general population. But first I want to mention that the last time the MTA went to visit Rabbi Lamb, the senior class, Rabbi Schiller was there as well. Rabbi Lamb said to me, I don't know if you remember hearing this, he said, every high school should teach Reb Tzadok.
Who said that?
Rabbi Lamb. You recall that?
No.
He said that, yes, okay. He said, I asked, because he mentioned Reb Tzadok in his presentation, how he learned Reb Tzadok, which took me by surprise, and then he said every high school should learn Reb Tzadok. I'm not sure exactly how high schools supposed to learn Reb Tzadok. Probably beginning of Tzidkas Tzaddik would work, but in any event, that was from the head of modern Orthodoxy, so to speak. In my modern Orthodox experience, so there's somebody here tonight, one of the people who was one of my Talmidim, And one of the high points of my chinuch career was when he and another person who's not here tonight got into a fist fight in Shir over Chassidus versus Misnagdus. I asked both of them today whether they remember the exact Nekudah in Avodas Hashem over which the fist fight took place, and they don't exactly remember, but that was very, very beautiful to see that people actually cared about something in school which was meaningful in terms of Avodas Hashem. So obviously the notions of Chassidus have the capacity to turn people onto Yadus in a way which is very profound and even emotional. On the other hand, we should not deceive ourselves, as Rabbi Shul will tell you later, to think that we outside of the Hasidic community are experiencing authentic Chassidus. The Seforim we learn, for the most part, they don't learn in Hasidic yeshivas. The P.S. Setzner, the Siva Sholem, I guess they learn in Slonim, but or the Seforim like that certainly, they don't learn the Sfas Emes or Tzaddik, Sfas Emes maybe in Ger, are not learned in Hasidic yeshivas. Morei Naim, I think, is the sefer which is most popular in Hasidic yeshivas, which I have not actually even learned. I have one of my roles is one of my professional positions is that I go around to yeshivas as part of an accreditation process to monitor them. And I went once to one of the yeshivas I go to, I won't mention the name. I asked them in Yiddish because their English was not so good, and my Yiddish was not so good, but it worked out. I asked them, "Was meint das zu sein a Chassidischer Bacher?" What does it mean to be a Chassidischer Bacher? And this is the answers which I received. And I think these answers are good answers. Rabbi Shul confirmed with me that they're good answers. And they are things which actually do have an impact, I think, on any community which does approach Chassidus, even in the more intellectual way that we approach Chassidus. The first answer was, to mevatel sich zu Rebbe. To mevatel oneself to the Rebbe. Now I want to tell you, I went to another Chassidish yeshiva, a top-notch one. Rabbi Shul is on the board of the yeshiva I'm about to mention. Again, I'm not going to mention the name. And I asked them the same question, and in that yeshiva, they're not so frum about their Chassidus. They're kind of more eclectic, and they're the.
He's referring to MTA, by the way.
They're the fellow.
On the board.
They're the fellow. Yeah, the viral show is on the board. They're the fellow answer. One of the top arguments answered Bittul Ayesh, and I said Bittul Ayesh. What does it mean Bittul Ayesh? They said Bittul Takodesh Baruch Hu. So I said, oh, you're not so Hasidish, because in the other yeshiva they said Bittul to Rebbe. So he said, no, versteht sich Bittul to Rebbe. So I said, too late. Then a chassid tut lifnim mishur sadin, which is actually the Rambam's definition of a chassid, to moisiv zayin nocha geder, to add gedorim, which of course Chassidus is very much into adding gedorim into kedusha, which is again something which we can get into later on. Essen und schlofen l'shem shamayim, b'chol dorachecha de'ehu, to eat and drink l'shem shamayim, which is part of b'chol dorachecha de'ehu, to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu in everything we do. Yeder mitzvah mer b'simcha mer b'cheshek. Each mitzvah to do with more simcha and more cheshek, more desire. Starka ishtoikekus for avodas Hashem, strong yearning for avodas Hashem. And finally, hanhogas, mikveh levush. One goes to the mikveh every morning, one wears Hasidic levush. So I think actually in everything except the last aspect, there have been positive influences in the general world which has adopted Hasidus, which have extended to us. I don't know if mikveh and levush are necessary or not necessary to be a true chassid. Probably they are. But the other Hasidic influences, I think, have permeated our community and have certainly affected us positively.
So I think it's been a very positive addition to the community, and certainly in terms of increasing passion for the Ribono Shel Olam, for Avodas Hashem. I think one area, and perhaps to disagree a bit with what Rabbi Beckhofer said, I think that within the Hasidic world, there is a growth of mashpiyim or teachers who don't come from the established Hasidic dynasties. People like Rav Wolfson, Rav Morgenstern in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Zilberberg, Rav Kluger in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And these individuals have, tremendous passion. They're also characterized, for the most part, as being very, very broad-minded. They'll quote from both Lubavitch and Breslov, from the Russian Hasidim and the Ukrainian Hasidim and the Polish Hasidim and Sfas Emes and others. And I think that their ideas are are studied in Hasidic circles, maybe not in the established Hasidic yeshivas, but amongst their followers, they're certainly studied, and they're studied as well in our circles. I think that one of the challenges for our community in terms of Chassidus is that sometimes our community tries to put its own values into, project them into the Hasidic framework, and that's not necessarily the case. So, when we hear things like B'chol Drachecha Da'ehu, in regards to Zionism, we see Zionism as an expression of B'chol Drachecha Da'ehu, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bringing the Jewish people back to Eretz Yisrael, of soldiers being Moser Nefesh to save Jewish lives. And I think it's quite a shock to discover that in mainstream Hasidic circles, they don't view it that way at all. They're very influenced by, say, the Satmar Rebbe, quite critical of the state of Israel, and certainly critical of Jews carrying weapons and fighting against non-Jews.
We're gonna continue with Rabbi Reichman. Are there any Hasidic ideas that you feel do not get enough attention? And are there any ideas in Hasidus that you think get too much attention?
Within our community or in general?
Feel free. I speak with a purposeful ambiguity, so feel free to read into it however you.
I think within our community, I'm not sure if the emphasis on Kedusha and Shmiras Einayim gets as much attention as it should in the Hasidic community. I think in the Hasidic community it's a very big emphasis, and for us it's harder to try to live up to those types of standards that the Hasidim are trying to live at. So I think that that's one area that certainly we can do more of in terms of Gidrei Kedusha and getting better in that area.
Who's next?
Going this way,
At the core, even though I love learning Chassidus, I remain a Litvak, and Chassidus does not speak to me, and this following up a little bit on what Rabbi Reichman said, in terms of its idealism. In other words, it's hard to find the sense of idealism which one finds in the Bali Musar in the Hasidic Seforim. It's possible, but it's not as easy. And I mean by Musar Seforim, I don't mean just any Musar Seforim, as many people here know. My role model, my great Moral Derech is Rabbi Avram Elia Kaplan, and you don't find Rabbi Avram Elia Kaplan-esque writings in Chassidus. And Rabbi Avram Elia Kaplan addressed issues, of profound issues of not just Yiras Hashem and Avodas Hashem, but also of Zionism and poetry, and a very eclectic and wonderful spirit, which really speaks to me much more. Having said that, but in Derech HaLimud, I think we can gain a tremendous amount by Chassidus. When I say Derech HaLimud, I mean our Limud of Agadata. There's one profound tzaddik I'd like to share, which is an example of something which is, to me, was unbelievable. And which is, there's a famous medrash, which you're all familiar with, which says that Paro had 3 Yotzim, which were Yisro, Eov, and Bilam. And Bilam said that they should be Meshabed, the Jews. They should make them slaves. And Yisro said they should not enslave the Jews. And Eov was quiet. And therefore, each one had their own results in the end. Yisro was rewarded, Bilam was punished, and Eov suffered Yisurim. He suffered affliction as a result. So Reb Tzadok asked the obvious question, which is, Chazal say that Bilam wasn't born. Bilam died at the age of 34, in the 40th year of the sojourn in the desert, which means he wasn't yet born anytime at the time of Tzias Mitzrayim, let alone at the time of the enslavement. So how is Bilam the Yoetz of Paro? So Tzadok says that these 3 prototypes of Yisro, of Bilam, and of Eov are 3 parts of the psyche of Paro. They're not individuals; they weren't real people. But a Chazal, whenever they talk in Agadata, and even they use names, They don't mean to tell you that these were people. They mean to tell you concepts. And when you learn Chazal, Maharal does it a little bit, but the Tzaddik even more. When you learn Chazal from that perspective, it is extraordinarily eye-opening. You can understand things in a much more profound way, which we normally don't get, especially because Litvish yeshivas were trained to gloss over the Agadata as much as possible.
Right, that do not get enough attention. I think two of the most popular works that have come from the Hasidic world in recent years that are very much studied in modern Orthodox and religious Zionist circles are those of Rabbi Yaakov Meir Shechter of Breslov, and of course of the late Slonim Rebbe Nasiv Shalom. And I think both of them conjure up a theme which is very important for all of us, and that is the complaint which we often hear from people that I am not turned on to whatever aspect of Avodas Hashem, davening, learning, Shabbos, Yondah, whatever it is, mitzvahs. The fact I'm not turned on, as if we sit back and await some mystical process which will descend upon us. I think that these Seforim and many other Seforim will tell us that we are obligated to create and conjure up within ourselves these passions, and that the lack of them is attributed to our not spending enough time both in reflective and heartfelt yearning, and that these two things can provide us with those passions which we yearn for and sometimes say we have not yet realized. So the idea that Hisodoris, or whatever term we want to give to the koch of Avodas Hashem, that this is something we ourselves can create within ourselves. And any ideas that are emphasized too much, well, once again, we'd have to differentiate between sort of our community, the Wayuk type community, and the Hasidic community. I think if anything is emphasized too much in the Wayuk type community, I'm going to repeat myself again, it is an easy, flippant notion that one can jump and dance and prance and sing and ruach, and there's these vague, easy cliches, and to somehow think this is connected with Avodas Hashem B'chalal and Avodas Chassidus B'frat. I'll never forget, many years ago, it goes back to 1981, Ramaz hockey team, they had come back from a certain seminar, and I remember they were chanting 1, 2, 3, ruach, ruach, ruach. And I thought, how absurd and sad this really is. And that's the kind of thing I'm referring to. They were good guys, don't get me wrong, but they had this sort of vague sense of what spirit meant, that spirit was some kind of I don't know, fraternity party of some sort, but of course it's much more serious than that. So a tendency to accentuate in a superficial and flippant way things that some think are Chassidus. And then in terms of the Hasidic community itself, we'd have to differentiate, I think, between any society. There's sort of a bottom level, there's a broad middle, and there's a top, so the spiritual bell curve of any Jewish community. And I think that as far as the middle of the Hasidic community, there is a sense that if one maintains the counter-revolutionary aspects of Hasidus, the shunning of modernism and Goyishkeit, and one maintains the segulas of the minhagim of Hasidus, that is what the thing is. So if one flees Goyishkeit and one does the minhagim, so now one is what the Baal Shem meant. And that, I think, is a grave error, that the counter-revolutionary and the seguliistic aspects of Hasidus are part of the historical package, and whether they can be separated from the main body of Hasidus, perhaps we can talk about later on. But certainly they are not what the Baal Shem and the Maggid and Talmidei HaMaggid really wanted from us. What they wanted was something far more profound and far more awake with Getlichkeit. So that would be, I think, the misunderstanding that the older established Hasidus have, that they think that the rejection of modernism and Minhagim is what the Baal Shem wanted.
So maybe we'll dive a little bit further into some of the concepts that you were just alluding to. and we'll just ask a blanket question of can Hasidic thought and Hasidic practice be separated from one another? You know, we're going to start with Rabbi Bechhofer. Just to keep fresh.
You know, obviously, since I'm sitting on this panel, my answer is yes, because that is what I represent. Whether I'm right or not, I can't tell you. But my feeling is that, like Rav Dessler writes in the Fifth Mitzvah, he says, today, once upon a time, there were Hasidim which had their own Darchei Avodah, and there were Misnan which had their own Darchei Avodah. It's a story from the Satmar Rebbe, I should say, before I go on, which is that I wrote an essay once on Chassidus, which you can find online, Forks in the Road, about Chassidus versus Misnaglus, which I wanted to publish in the Jewish Observer. Novominsker said you can't publish it because it needs to be a book, not an article, and it never made it into a book. But I thought it was a pretty good article. And at the beginning, I quote the Satmar Rebbe is supposed to have said. Satmar Rebbe is supposed to have said that once upon a time there was a man who only ate fleshik, and his son-in-law married a family only ate milchik. So they couldn't eat together. So they had two separate kitchens, two separate dining rooms, and the wife would make for her husband this meal and for her son-in-law that meal. Eventually, they became poor and they couldn't afford anymore. So everybody was eating potatoes. But they were still eating the potatoes in the fleshik side and potatoes in the milchik side, until finally they realized, you know what, we're all eating potatoes anyway, we might as well get together. So the Satmar Rebbe is supposed to have said that the Brisker Rav was the last true Misnaged, and that he himself was the last true Chassid. And since then, everything is eclectic, both by erosion but also as an advantage. And that's what the Michal says. He says, in our day and age, whatever we can take from the Mechazik Avodas Hashem, we don't have to be doctrinaire about it. We shouldn't be doctrinaire about it. Whatever, everybody has different things which speak to them across the different the array of choices, and it's important to choose those things which are a person to greater Avodas Hashem, greater learning, greater Shmiras HaMitzvahs, greater Avas Hashem, greater Yiras Hashem, wherever they come from.
There's one of the great Seforim is called Nesiv Mitzvosecha by the Rebbe of Kamarna, and he records a mashal from Reb Tzvi Hirsid Shaver about what is the Chiddush of Chassidus, because one can ask a lot of the basic ideas of the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid and the Baal Tanya for sure are already in the writings of the Ari and in the writings of Rav Chaim Vital. So what's the Chiddush of Chassidus? So he explained that the mashal he gave was a country that is missing a king. King passed away, they need a new king. So they hear that there's the right person in a certain place. So those who are, connected to the news and hear all the information, they're already at peace. But a lot of others are not at peace yet. And so they said, we'll send a shliach, we'll go see the person. And the shliach comes back with a great report, so more people now are at ease. But the real peasants, they still don't feel good. They still feel they don't have a king. So they finally say, we'll bring the candidate here, we'll show him to the peasants, and then already they'll accept that they have a king and that they don't have to worry that they don't have a king. So he said that the Zohar is sort of to be aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but for Gedolim to grasp it. The Ari HaKadosh is sort of the shaliach who was sent out and comes back with a positive report. And the nature of what the Baal Shem Tov was trying to accomplish was that even the peasant can open up his eyes and point, Hine Elokeinu Zeh. I see HaKadosh Baruch Hu with my own eyes. I see Elokus everywhere. I see that Einod Milvado, there's just the Ribono Shlolem, and everything is from him, and to reach even the lower levels. So I think that aspiration, that Chassidus is to bring a real deep Getlichkeit, to borrow the term from Rabbi Schiller, to everyone, to even the lowest madregas, even to the people who don't know much and don't do much, I think is a very, very profound truth within Chassidus, and that's why I would argue that it is possible to separate Hasidic thought from Hasidic practice, because there are going to be Jews who are not going to wear a shtreimel and a bekisha, and to think that they're not able to get to what the Baal Shem Tov was looking to bring, an awareness of Hashem and seeing Hine Malkeinu, here's our King, serving Hashem in every dimension, I think is not tenable. Certainly the core of Chassidus, which focuses on pnimius, on an inner dimension, is not just an inner dimension of the physical world, but within each person. The inner dimension, the neshama, the elukus, is much more important than the chitzonius and the externals. But if what's meant in separating Hasidic thought from Hasidic practice is just sort of the theories of Chassidus versus the bringing Ruchnius to a very tangible level, that I think is inseparable. The whole point of Chassidus is to make Ruchnius very tangible, very real, and that I don't think could be separated in any way.
When I said before that the Hasidic movement, as it has arrived in history at this point, carries with it three separate elements: the Avodas HaChasidus, let's call it, and the Segulas of Minhagim and miraculous history, and then what I call the counter-revolutionary element, which is the rejection of modernism. I think there's no doubt that these things can be very much separated. And it is particularly, I think, the genius of, well, Breslov and maybe Chabad to an extent, that are the most open to that separation, to extract Hasidus from its cultural confines. And in fact, I found it interesting that of the sort of non-Hasidic, spiritual Hasidic movements that Rabbi Reichman listed before, that 3 or 4 of them were sort of Breslov-oriented, so that Breslov seems to still have that ability to see its spiritual package as preeminent. On the other hand, there is no doubt that a Hasidus which will be open to the philosophy and the avoid of Hasidus, while devoid of the counter-revolutionary and minhagic elements, would look very, very different than anything that we've seen until now. And that's why I referenced before sort of certain religious Zionist circles in Eretz Yisrael, the so-called Chalbakuk, or even a more mainstream Chadal, we get a whiff of this. And what would develop there would be something different than we've heard or seen about until this point. But if one believes, and I do believe this, that the Torah Baal Shem is Nitzchias, then who knows exactly what the Levush is going to be that is going to extend it into future years. And I just want to add one more just point here as far as Satmarov, who's been mentioned twice in several contexts. I think it is important that the audience should realize that the Satmarov's approach to Hasidus and to Rebbes and so forth was an aberration of the Hasidic movement, because he felt very compelled to say, because of his ideological qualms about Zionism and what he saw was a misstatement or misunderstanding of Ahavas Yisrael, he felt compelled very often in his Seforim to say that Hasidus is completely forgotten, nobody knows what Baal Shem is anymore, nobody knows what this is, it's all over, it's finished, because he felt that there might be a distortion of the likes of the B'ditch V'Rav, or Moshe Psasso, or Zisha, these more Ahavas Yisrael, the Rebbe, so to speak. He thought they could be distorted into being soft on Zionism, which to him was the ultimate philosophical failing, and therefore he tended to downplay the miraculous, the Rebbes, the Hasidic doctrine, in a way which was sort of unique to him and those who followed in his ways. Also wanted to just make one other horror, as long as we're here with Satmarov, that on the Zionism question, that I don't think we can quite equate the anti-Zionism of Satmar, Tolsar, and Dushinsky, et cetera, with the non-Zionism of the 95% of the Hasidic world, which is somewhat different. It's not clear how it views the phenomenon of Zionism, whereas I say those groups which I just listed before see it as inherently evil, but they would be a tiny segment of the overall Hasidic community. back to the original question, yes, they can be separated, and Mitzvah, God willing, they will be effectively separated in many communities.
Focusing back on the YU community, let me just make a quick note. If anybody has a burning question that they would like asked, feel free to text me. I'll give you my cell phone number, or you can reach out to me on social media, D-Ideas. But also, feel free to text me, 516-404-0303. We're going to ask one more major question, then we're going to end up with a lightning round. We're going to try to do some quick takes on different parts of Chassidus. But as a larger question, focusing specifically on the YU community, how do you think Hasidic thought and practice should best be integrated in this community that we have right here? And maybe also, are there any instances where you see it being integrated which you don't think necessarily is a healthy expression for the population right here? And we can start with Rabbi Rechman.
I actually think that over the years, our community's gotten a lot better in this regard. I'm thrilled that Rav Moshe Weinberger is now such a major part of our yeshiva, and I think in general it's a beautiful thing. I guess in terms of where it can be added is at a younger age. I think more of the high schools should be learning Chassidus. I know Frisch now has a Chassidus Chabura. I think it would be beautiful if SAR, if Ramaz, if other high schools would also be learning Chassidus. And I actually think that we're fortunate that Baruch Hashem, there's been a tremendous bikush for Avodas Hashem and for Ruchnius within our community.
I think I'm going to pass on this one.
You're going to pass?
Yes. Why the YU community is so broad and so eclectic, it's an advantage and disadvantage. Because
Sounds like you're not passing anymore. Sorry.
I'm explaining why I'm passing. So therefore, it's hard to say what the community should do. It's not a cohesive community, and it's Isha Yosha Ben Avyasa. I don't think that we can prescribe anything which is going to be meaningful.
All right. It's a tough question. My initial response, born of 40 years toiling in non-Orthodox high school chinuch, is let's get the basics straight first before we add the hisself of Chassidus. You know, there are many days when I think that let's just straighten out basic davening and learning and Shmiras HaMitzvahs, and then we can add this Hisafa.
You know, I would like to add to that.
Well, I'm not. You haven't finished.
But I don't want to forget.
Yeah, go ahead.
You go to an average davening in certain yeshiva high schools of our circle, and you go to Vishnitz in Monsey on a weekday, and there's no comparison. They're right. So there's a lot of work.
That's Rabbi Bechhofer. I'm afraid to imagine what it would have been like to answer the question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this is disturbing. I mean, as again, to enhance your answer a little bit or add to it, every day I travel between these three worlds. My day begins at MTA, and then I go to Beishraga in Monsey, which is sort of a standard yeshivish place where I am in the afternoon, and evenings I'm in the Hasidic community of Monsey. And there really is no comparison just in terms of basic Shmiras Torah mitzvahs. But again, as Rabbi Bechhofer said, it's such an eclectic world, it's such a diverse world, non-Orthodoxy. Even within MTA itself, and there's just, the student body is so different, which is why it's very difficult, as you say, to create an educational paradigm that would apply to all the many different layers and orientations of the student body in MTA, and then to apply it to other types of places like Frisch and Ramaz and SAR and so forth. So it'd be very, very difficult. But just to finish my point before. So there are days when I think, let's just get the basics straight before we worry about the flea flickers and the slam dunks. Let's run the ball off tackle and work on our layups. That's what I think on...
What language is
Yes. Rabbi Becher is of the very few people that thinks the Super Bowl is a cricket competition. But On other days, though, I think, or more optimistic days when the sun is shining and the constellations are aligned correctly, I think, well, maybe not. Maybe the panemius of Derech Hashem is such, and maybe the lechtigkeit of Derech Hasidus is such that maybe it can serve as a stimulus to practice running the ball off tackle and so forth. So in that sense, there are days when I think maybe we could do more actually formally or informally teaching and discussing. My experience has been, though, and to articulate the other side of the equation, my experience has been, though, that for those who are lacking in the basics or have a certain negativity towards the basics, no matter what you do, it's going to be a very, very tough road to hoe. So my answer is on most days, I think it's better to water the ground that is already fertile, and on other days, I think maybe the lechtigkeit is such that it can bring even the neshamas yeveshos can be brought to the Rebbeinu Shem. Different days.
Okay, before we get to the lightning round, we have a few questions that have been texted in. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. I want to focus on one. Feel free to pass entirely because it is somewhat subversive, but I actually found it to be a fairly fascinating question. And that is something that I've actually written about, but I would love to hear what the panelists say, is that there has been a trend in more progressive and left-wing communities to use Chassidus to be more permissive, specifically to people who are in for issues related to egalitarian rights, to issues related to LGBT inclusion, and they will quote Hasidic ideas to maybe allow and foster a more permissive and expansive community. To those who do such, would you respond that they are separating Hasidic ideas and Hasidic thought, as we discussed earlier? Are they perverting Hasidic thought? Or maybe is there room to use Hasidic thought to such end? I was wondering if anybody would want to weigh in on that question.
So if I could jump in, one of the ideas I heard from this Tichinah Rebbe was to describe or to try to define the concept of Netzach versus Hod. And the Rebbe suggested that there are two models of leadership. There's one model of leadership which he called Netzach leadership, let's say Moshe Rabbeinu, Yikov Adinah Sahar. There's a certain truth. Moshe Rabbeinu says his truth. The truth is penetrating. It may be abrasive. It may be difficult. He powers forward with his truth. The other model of leadership, we'll call it the leadership of Aaron HaKohen, Midas HaHod, is to be concerned that the person who has to hear the truth may not be ready to hear the truth. And so Aaron HaKohen, he smiles, he says, "You're really right, let's stick with it," and eventually to bring in the truth. And one of the things that he said, which was very powerful, is that both modes of leaders have to be in communication with each other, but especially Aaron needs a Moshe Rabbeinu. Aaron, who's trying to be Makarev people, who's not projecting right away the harsh realities and is giving people time to come to it, has to always be checking with the Moshe Rabbeinu to make sure he doesn't go off. And I think that's where there's the big difference. I think it's possible to separate Hasidic thought from certain practices while being mevatel oneself to a Rebbe, asking a Rebbe these appropriate places, things to drop, not so important, yes important. I think in these areas where it's subversive, there's no one of any stature who's supporting these types of efforts. And that's, unfortunately, some people misuse Torah, but masmi'ilim ba, it becomes a samisa instead of a samchayim.
I think that I would agree 99.999% with Rabbi Ratner's formulation. Torah Judaism is orthodoxy, and there are certain doctrines we must believe, and there are certain practices broadly written in the Shulchan Aruch which we must obey, and to reject them is to reject the essence of Torah and the essence of our belief. However, does that mean in the practical day-to-day efforts of Kiruv that one must the very first day tell the budding Baal Tshuva, there are two shitas and Egavas that do both, Serugan or Ritzufim, that might not be necessary on the first day. So there can be a certain development, a prudential development to how one expresses oneself. But I think that the movements and organizations that you mentioned, and I think also of sort of the whole sort of, the Zalman Schachter types and these kind of sort of bizarre amalgamations based upon Chassidus, we have to reject them in doctrine, but they too are people, and we must reach out to them in the perversity of their errors to be madrich for them in the right direction. But there can be no compromise with the essentials of Emunah and Torah and mitzvahs.
If you go back to the Arizal and you talk about being malin tzaitzas, you can justify just about anything, as Shabtai Tzvi did, as Jacob Frank did, as has been done throughout the ages. The Kabbalistic underpinnings of Chassidus are very dangerous. Judaism is a dangerous religion. They have many different shittas which can lead people, if abused or misused, to negative ends. I remember one of my Rosh Yeshiva in Shalvim said to us that he once knew a younger man in Kol Torah who learned Musar, and one day poured gasoline on himself and set himself on fire because he couldn't live with Averos which he was committing. Bittul Yesh, yes. So which he thought he was committing. So Judaism is a dangerous religion. That's what makes it fun. Otherwise, it would be boring. So therefore, of course, everything which we do has to be done with a sense of Yiras Shamayim. It's like Rav Moshe's tshuva to 1974, I think it was, to the woman in Boston who wanted to put on a talis, where Rav Moshe said, there are gedorim in which normative gedorim in which we add Yiras Shamayim to ourselves, to which enhance our avodas Hashem, and if we're not going through the normative pathways, then we have to check whether it's really motivated by Yiras Hashem. So this also is true of anything in Yadus. Everything in Yadus has to be checked. Is this part of the normal derech, which is Mekuba Midor Dor? Is this motivated by the right motivations? Is the L'Shem Shemayim of Av and Yir involved in it?
Okay, so we're going to do the lightning round now. And the way I'd like to frame this, aside from one question lightning round, which really is, you can do in hopefully 1 or 2 minutes, but we're just going to start from Rabbi Reichman and move rightward and leftward, and we'll be very, very quick. Each question should take just a couple of seconds. So, no longer alive, who's your favorite figure in Hasidic history?
Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev.
P.S. Etzner.
Square it up as a
What living figure in Hasidus most inspires you?
Rav Wolfson.
None.
Lach Mistufke Leva Borough Park.
What is your favorite sefer in Hasidic thought?
Tanya.
Anything by Reb Tzadok.
Varies, but on many days, Rabbalu Lorot's letters, Iger Shoman and Munim.
Do you have a favorite vart or story, obviously compact within like something that you could encapsulate in a line from Chassidus?
I think the Rav Wolfson's theme that our door is the Pchusim, we're the lowly Jews, but the lowly Jews are the ones that bring Mashiach. So we're really the most special.
It has to be one line.
One line.
The Rebbe Maharash once met with Rebbe Solslanter in Rosh Chabad in one of the resorts, and the Maharash was riding in a carriage, and Rebbe Solslanter was walking, and Maharash said to him, "Come up in the carriage." And Rebbe Solslanter said, "No, I can't." And Rebbe Maharash said, "Why? I checked the seat. There's no shatnez in it." And the Rebbe Solslanter said, "I still can't. I'm Avin Yavin."
There's a slonim about that the Baal Shem came into the world to teach us anava and simcha. The hepech of anava is gaiva. The hepech of simcha is atzvus and holulus. So that the hepech of simcha is not, as we necessarily think, depression, but part of the hepech of simcha is flippancy, is silliness.
What book would you recommend to somebody who wanted to learn more about Hasidic thought?
I would recommend my book, Flames of Faith, an introduction to Hasidic thought.
Got to move product. Okay.
For the Avodah of Chassidus, Chavas Talmidim. For the theory of Chassidus, Tzidkas Tzaddik.
I'm going to say the Torah's Avos, which is a Slonim Alikut, provided that before one goes to the Veta, one learns the Hakdama of the Nesiva Shalom. And if I may quickly throw in a second one, I'm going to go with Rabbi Becha for Chavas Talmidim also.
Okay, let's thank all of the panelists for a really wonderful discussion and evening. And if they'll be able to stick around afterwards, you can come over, thank them, ask some questions. But I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and have a great evening. All the best.
If anybody's got back to Muncie, please let me know.
Yeah, but you have some book for me, right? Oh, I thought there was some confusion about that. Oh, okay. Yeah, so.